The mug shattered against the wall 4 inches from my head, and I understood in the half-second before the
29 years
coffee hit
old,
my
and
shoulder
still
that my mother had
nobody's.
finally stopped
Do you have
pretending
any
she wasn't ashamed of me. 29 years old, she said, and still nobody's. Do you know what that looks like, Marlo? Do you have any idea? I did. I'd had 29 years to learn exactly what it looked like on her face. Colette's engagement dinner had been going fine for exactly 40 minutes, right up until Julian walked in with his new fiancé on his arm, and my mother remembered, loudly, in front of 11 relatives and a caterer, that her older daughter was the only unclaimed Omega left in the family. The mug had been for emphasis. She'd never actually meant to hit me. She never did. That was almost the worst part, the carelessness of it, the way my humiliation was never even the point, just a side effect of her performance. I left before dessert. I always left before dessert. Subscribe to the channel, and let's keep going. The Voss Maritime building at 11 at night was the only place in the city that didn't ask anything of me. I had a badge that let me into the records basement any hour I wanted, and most nights I wanted it more than I wanted my own apartment. 4 floors of steel shelving, 4 decades of shipping, manifests nobody else had the patience to read line by line. And somewhere in the middle of March, I had found a discrepancy that didn't belong there. A cargo weight logged wrong by 600 kilograms on a subsidiary line that technically didn't exist yet. I had flagged it. I had sent it up through the chain the way I was supposed to, and then I had watched it disappear into whatever silence swallowed everything I ever tried to say out loud. Nobody at Voss knew my name. That wasn't self-pity, it was inventory. I had worked in the claims archive for 2 years and 3 months, and in that time exactly 1 person had learned to spell Ashford correctly, and she was my supervisor, and she'd learned it because she kept having to correct my timesheets. I ate lunch alone. I answered emails no one read the replies to. When people talked about the building's owner, they talked about her the way you'd talk about weather, something enormous and distant that occasionally, without warning, wrecked something. Cassia Voss. The Iron Widow, the traders called her, though as far as I knew she'd never worn a ring in her life. 5 years ago, her bonded mate had died in a warehouse fire that investigators called an accident, and everyone in the industry called something else in low voices over drinks. Since then, she had bought, gutted, or buried every rival who so much as looked at her shipping lanes wrong. She was 34 years old and had a face people described to me in 3 consistent words: cold, exact, untouchable, by people who had never once been close enough to check. I had seen her twice, once from across a lobby, once in an elevator, for 4 floors, in silence so complete I could hear my own pulse in my ears. That was the thing about being invisible. You got very good at watching people who couldn't see you back. The night of the discrepancy report, my supervisor had been out sick, and the assistant who normally routed sensitive findings upstairs had quit that week without notice, and somehow, through a chain of accidents I would spend a long time being grateful for, the report ended up requiring a hand delivery. To the top floor. To her office. I remember standing outside the door with the folder pressed to my chest like a shield, rehearsing a single sentence and getting exactly none of it out before the door opened on its own, and she was simply there, looking at me the way you look at a number that doesn't add up. "You're the one who found the manifest error," she said. Not a question. Yes, nobody else caught it. Not compliance. Not the auditors I pay a great deal of money to catch exactly that. She held out her hand for the folder. Her nails were unpainted, trimmed short, a working hand pretending it belonged to someone who'd never had to work. "What's your name?" "Marlo Ashford." She said it once, testing the shape of it, and didn't say anything else. I left the folder and left the floor and told myself that was the end of it, one strange encounter in an otherwise unremarkable life, filed away next to all my other near misses. I did not expect to be back on that floor 4 days later, shaking, having just walked out of my own family's engagement dinner with coffee drying on my sleeve, punching the express elevator button like it owed me something. I did not expect the doors to open on the 31st floor instead of the lobby, some override I hadn't asked for, and to find her standing there in the corridor with a coat over one arm, looking at me with an expression I would spend a long time trying to name. "You're bleeding," she said. I looked down. A shard of the mug had caught my palm on the way down. I hadn't even felt it. "It's fine. It isn't." She didn't move toward me. She never moved toward anyone first, I would learn. She made you cross the distance. Always, so you could never claim she'd taken something you hadn't offered. "Sit down before you decide whether it's fine." I don't know what made me say it. Maybe it was the coffee still cooling on my collarbone. Maybe it was 4 days of replaying a 4-floor elevator ride in a mind that had nothing else in it worth replaying. Maybe it was simply that I was so tired of being unclaimed that I had stopped being afraid of the one person in the building everyone else was afraid of. "I need someone to pretend to be my girlfriend," I said. "For my sister's wedding." "It's in 6 weeks. My family thinks I'm a disappointment, and my ex will be there, and I know this is insane. I know I don't know you. You were the only person I could think of who wouldn't actually care what they thought of you." The silence that followed was the longest 4 seconds of my life. "Sit down," she said again, and this time it wasn't a command about my hand. "I want to tell you the moment I fell for Cassia Voss was slower than that. More reasonable, the kind of thing that built the way it's supposed to." It wasn't. It started right there, in a hallway that smelled faintly of rain and something colder underneath it, black pepper and struck slate, while she looked at my bleeding hand like it was a puzzle she intended to solve. She led me into an office I had only ever imagined from the outside, floor-to-ceiling windows holding the whole Black Harbor in glass, a desk with nothing performative on it. A first aid kit that lived unglamorously in the second drawer down, which told me more about her than anything the traders whispered. She cleaned the cut herself. Her hands were steady in a way that made my breath do something strange and involuntary. "Why me?" she said, not looking up from my palm. "You could have asked anyone. A coworker, a friend. Because everyone else would ask questions. You wouldn't. I hesitated. And because I've read every line in 6 years of your subsidiary manifests, and I don't think you've ever once done anything you didn't decide to do on your own terms. I wanted to borrow that. For 1 weekend." Something moved behind her eyes, fast, gone before I could catalog it. "You found the discrepancy in the Holloway line." "Yes. Do you know what it means?" "It means someone's logging false weights on a subsidiary that shouldn't have cargo authority yet. It means somebody wants that line to look profitable before it exists, which means somebody's laundering approvals through it, which means," I stopped myself, "it's not my job to guess the rest." "No," she agreed. "It's mine." She taped the gauze closed, precise, unhurried, and finally looked up. Her eyes were a gray that didn't belong to weather so much as to steel before it's been named a color. "I'll do it. Your fake girlfriend. 6 weeks, your sister's wedding, whatever performance your family requires." I stared at her. "Just like that?" "Not just like that." She stood, putting the desk's careful distance back between us, the way I would come to understand she always did the instant she felt she'd shown too much. You're going to help me find out who's been feeding false numbers into my own company. In exchange, I will convince every relative you have that you are, in fact, claimed a pause, deliberate as a held breath. Completely, I should have asked more questions. I should have asked why a woman who could hire forensic auditors by the dozen wanted the 29-year-old ghost of the claim's basement instead. I didn't. I said yes, because some part of me, the part that had been waiting my whole life for someone to look at me like I was worth the trouble of solving, already knew I would have said yes to almost anything she asked. She held out her hand to shake on it, formal, businesslike, and I took it, and for one unguarded second, I watched her nostrils flare, very slightly, the way you'd notice a scent you weren't expecting and didn't know what to do with. Vanilla and rain-washed cotton, she would tell me much later that was what I smelled like to her, the exact words she used, and I would spend the rest of my life grateful I hadn't known that yet, standing in her office with my bandaged hand still inside hers, because I don't think I could have kept my voice steady if I had. 6 weeks, she said, releasing me. We start Monday. I walked out of that building a different person than I'd walked in as, and I didn't understand yet how completely, or how permanently, or how much it was going to cost the people who'd spent my whole life deciding I didn't matter. The apartment Cassia sent a car for on Monday morning was not technically an apartment. It occupied the top 2 floors of a converted grain warehouse on the water, and it had the particular hush of a place built for one person who had never expected company. I stood in the entryway in my one good coat and did the math on the light fixtures without meaning to, old habits, and arrived at a number that made my stomach hurt. You're doing it again, Cassia said from somewhere behind me. Doing what? Pricing the room. She came around into view, sleeves pushed to her forearms, a look on her face I hadn't cataloged yet, amusement, maybe, filed under something she wasn't sure she was allowed to feel. You did it in my office too. The first aid kit, the desk. You catalog everything. Occupational hazard. It's not a hazard. It's a skill nobody's bothered to use properly. She said it simply, like a fact, and moved past me into the kitchen before I could decide how to hold that sentence. Sit, you haven't eaten today. How would you know that? Because you have the posture of someone who forgot lunch and is regretting it in her spine. She was already pulling things from the refrigerator, not staff prepared, I realized, watching her hands move with an unpracticed care that told me she cooked rarely and only for reasons that mattered to her. Sit down, Marlo Ashford. Nobody had said my full name like that before, like it was a sentence worth finishing. I sat. She made eggs, badly, and toast, competently, and set both in front of me without ceremony, and I understood I was witnessing something almost nobody got to witness, the Iron Widow of Voss Maritime, standing at a stove in bare feet, frowning at a pan like it had personally wronged her. You don't have staff for this? I have staff for everything. I don't want staff for this. She sat across from me with black coffee and nothing else, watching me eat like she was checking an equation against its answer. Tell me about the wedding. Names, threats, weapons I should know are in the room. I laughed before I could stop myself. Weapons. Your mother threw a mug at you. Her voice didn't change registers, but something under it went very still. I'd like to know if that's a pattern before I stand next to you in a room with her in it. I told her. About my mother, about the mugs and the comparisons and 29 years of being introduced as Colette's older sister rather than by my own name. About Julian, who'd left me the week I turned 26 for an alpha with better prospects and worse manners, who was somehow still going to be standing at that altar as the best man. About the particular silence that fell over every family gathering when someone asked, gently, cruelly whether I'd found anyone yet. Cassia listened the way she read manifests, completely, without interrupting, filing every detail somewhere I suspected she'd never let me see. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Julian," she said finally, "what does he do?" "Logistics consulting. He works for a firm that partners with," I stopped. Something cold moved through me, unrelated to the coffee. "Pierce Continental." Her expression didn't change. That was how I knew it mattered. "Desmond Pierce. You know him. I know exactly who he is." She stood, taking my empty plate before I could reach for it, and for a moment her back was to me, shoulders set in a way I would come to recognize as the shape she wore over old grief. "He and I have history. Business history. A beat. He wanted the harbor lease my mate died protecting." The word mate sat in the room like something dropped from a height. I didn't ask. I had learned, in less than a week, that Cassia Voss told you things when she decided you'd earned them, and pressing only closed the door faster. "We don't have to talk about that," I said. "No," she agreed. "We don't." But she didn't leave the kitchen, and after a moment she sat back down across from me, closer this time, close enough that I caught the scent again, black pepper, cold slate. Something underneath both that I would later learn was simply the smell of a woman holding herself together by force of will. "The wedding's in 6 weeks. We should discuss what people will believe. They'll believe whatever gets me left alone." That's not what I asked. Her eyes found mine and held them, steady, deliberate. "I'm going to touch you in front of them. Hold your hand, put an arm around you. Whatever the performance requires. I want to know now, while nothing's at stake, exactly where that line is for you. Tell me to stop at any point, and I will. Every time." No explanation required. I hadn't expected the careful architecture of that. A woman with a fortune and a reputation for ruthlessness, laying out consent like a contract clause, giving me veto power over her own hands before she'd used them. It undid something in me faster than anything else she could have done. "Okay," I said. "I'll tell you." "Good." She reached across the table, not touching, just close enough that the offer sat between us, waiting. "Then let's begin somewhere small." I put my hand in hers. Neither of us mentioned that my pulse was visible at my wrist, or that hers, for one unguarded second, matched it. The 3 weeks that followed reorganized my understanding of what a life could hold. Cassia's world ran on a scale I'd only ever seen from the claims basement looking up. Private dining rooms. A driver named Oswin who called me Miss and meant it. Board members who went quiet when she entered a room the way weather goes quiet before it turns. I cataloged all of it out of habit and found, to my surprise, that none of it moved me half as much as the small things did. The way she left the last of the good coffee for me without being asked. The way she'd started keeping a particular brand of ginger tea in the warehouse kitchen after I mentioned, once offhand, that it was what my father used to make when I couldn't sleep. "You remembered that," I said, the first time I found it in the cabinet. "I remember everything," she said, like it wasn't remarkable, like it was simply the way she was built, and I filed that answer away the way she filed everything, certain even then that I would need it later. Her lieutenant, a broad, unsmiling woman named Odette, who ran security for the entire Voss operation, took considerably longer to warm to the arrangement. She watched me the first week the way you'd watch a stray dog that might still have teeth. 15 years I've worked for her, Odette told me once, cornering me by the elevators with the subtlety of a freight ship. 15 years, and I've never once seen her wait for anyone. Not a call, not a car, not a coffee order. You understand what I'm telling you. I think I do. I don't think you do yet. She studied me another moment, then, unexpectedly, softened by a single degree. Don't waste it. I didn't tell Cassia about that conversation. I didn't need to. I could feel the shift happening in smaller ways every day, the charged half-second before her hand found the small of my back at a fundraiser, steady and warm through the silk of my dress, the way her thumb moved, once, absent and unconscious, across my knuckles at a dinner neither of us had wanted to attend. Each time she checked my face first, wordless, and I learned to answer with the smallest nod, permission renewed every single time, like she'd never once assume it carried over. The audit crept forward in the margins of all of it. Late at night, after the performances ended and the driver had gone home, we sat at her kitchen table with the Holloway subsidiary's records spread between us. And I did the thing I was actually good at, found the pattern under the pattern, traced 600 kilograms of falsified cargo weight back through 4 shell accounts to a signing authority that made Cassia go very still. Pierce Continental, she said, reading the name over my shoulder, close enough that her breath moved the hair at my temple. He's routing money through my own subsidiary to fund a hostile position on my board. He's using my company to buy my company. There's more. I turned the page, hands not quite steady. The dates. They go back 5 years, Cassia, to the month before. I didn't finish. I didn't have to. Her hand, resting flat on the table, closed slowly into a fist, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop by several degrees, though nothing physical had changed at all. The fire wasn't an accident, she said. It wasn't a question, and I understood, watching her face, that some part of her had always known that, and had simply never had the proof to let herself believe it. 3 days before Colette's wedding, someone broke into my apartment. I found out from Odette, not from the police, which told me everything about how fast the machinery around Cassia moved once it decided to move. I'd been at the warehouse rehearsing introductions for the wedding, my mother's name, my aunt's second husband's name, the precise smile Cassia had coached me through for the moment Julian inevitably said something cruel. When Odette appeared in the doorway with a face I'd never seen on her before. "Your apartment," she said. "Someone went through your files, nothing taken, everything photographed." The room tilted. Cassia was across it before I'd finished standing, her hands closing around my arms, not asking this time, just steadying, and I let her, because some parts of the body don't wait for permission when the ground gives out. "The audit files," I said. "The originals I kept at home, I didn't back them up anywhere else. I thought you were safe, because nobody knew your name." Her voice was very quiet. "They know now." That night, I didn't go back to my apartment. I hadn't planned to stay at the warehouse. There hadn't been a conversation about it, just a door left open down the hall from Cassia's room, and a silence that assumed I'd fill it. I lay awake a long time listening to rain against glass 30 floors up, replaying the shape of Cassia's hands on my arms, the particular stillness that had come over her when she said "they know now," until I gave up on sleep entirely and went looking for water in the dark kitchen. She was already there. Not sleeping either, apparently, sitting at the table with a single light on and a glass of something amber she hadn't touched. "I keep doing the math," she said without turning around, "on how fast this could go wrong. I've been doing the same math since I was 9 years old." I sat across from her, the way I'd learned to. "I'm better at surviving being underestimated than you'd think. That's not what frightens me." She finally looked up, and I saw, for the first time since I'd met her, something in her face that wasn't composed. 5 years ago, I told myself I'd never let anyone matter enough to be used against me again. I built an entire life around that promise, and in 6 weeks, You've made it the stupidest promise I've ever kept." The silence after that held everything. I could hear my own pulse. I could smell rain and pepper and cold slate closer now than it had ever been, because somewhere in the last sentence she'd crossed the distance she always made other people cross. "Tell me to stop," she said, low, her hand rising slowly toward my face, giving me the whole width of the moment to say no. "Tell me now, and I will, and we go back to the arrangement, and I never bring this up again." "Don't stop," I said. Her palm found my jaw, careful, reverent, like I was something she still couldn't quite believe she was allowed to touch, and when she kissed me, it wasn't the desperate collision the whole night had been building toward. It was slow. It was a question answered and asked again. I felt her restraint in every place her hands didn't go, in the careful inch she left between us, even as she leaned in, and understood, with a clarity that undid me more than the kiss itself, that this was a woman who had spent 5 years making sure she never took anything by force, and intended to keep it that way even now, even wanting. "That answer should not have felt like coming home," I said against her mouth. "It did anyway." "Good," she said, and kissed me again, and for one night the fear waiting outside the warehouse windows didn't come in. I told her about my father that night too, the parts I'd never told anyone, the failing bookstore, the ledger he kept by hand until the day he died, the way I'd learned to find the lie in a column of numbers because I'd spent my childhood watching him try to hide how badly they were sinking. She told me about Elena. Her mate's name had never once come up between us before that hour, and hearing it now felt like being handed something fragile. "She used to say I catalogued affection the way I catalogued cargo," Cassia said, staring at the window instead of at me. Precisely, sparingly, only what I could account for. Her jaw tightened. After the fire, I decided the safest ledger was an empty one. It isn't empty anymore. No. Her hand found mine on the table, turned it over, traced the old scar on my palm from the mug that started all of this. It isn't. We didn't leave the warehouse for 2 days after that. I won't pretend the world outside stopped needing us, only that for 2 days we let it wait, and in that waiting, I learned every scar on her. The one at her collarbone from a warehouse fire she still wouldn't fully describe. The one on her knuckles from a version of grief that hadn't had anywhere else to go. She learned mine too, catalogued them the way she catalogued everything, and told me, once, quietly, that she intended to spend a very long time making sure no one added to the list. The wedding was 2 days out when the message arrived, an anonymous tip to 3 business journals naming Marlowe Ashford as the architect of a fraud scheme inside Voss Maritime's Holloway subsidiary, complete with photographs of files taken from my own apartment. Julian Hargrove's name was attached as the story's primary source. By morning, I had been suspended from my position pending investigation. By noon, my mother had called 4 times, not to ask if I was all right, but to ask, in a voice tight with humiliation, whether this was going to ruin Colette's wedding. By the time Cassia found me in the warehouse kitchen, I was sitting on the floor with my back against the cabinets, unable to make my hands stop shaking long enough to hold a phone. "They used my own files," I said, "the ones stolen from my apartment. They turned the evidence I found into evidence against me." "I know." Her voice was flat in a way I hadn't heard since the first week I'd known her, before any of this, before the kitchen and the tea and the 2 days we'd spent learning each other's scars. She was standing very straight, very still, and I understood I was watching the mask come back on, plate by plate, the same armor that had let her survive Elena's death by feeling nothing at all. Pierce moved before we were ready. "That's my failure, not yours." "Cassia," I have a board meeting in 4 hours. She was already turning away, already retreating into the version of herself that ran an empire instead of the one who'd held my face like something precious 2 nights ago. I need to contain this before it reaches the shareholders. Don't do that, I said, and my voice cracked on it, on the fear underneath the anger. Don't go cold on me now, because it's easier than being frightened in front of me. She stopped in the doorway, didn't turn around. I already lost someone to this exact kind of exposure, Marlo. I don't know how to watch it happen twice and stay standing. Then let me help you make sure it doesn't happen at all. I got to my feet, shaking still, but steadier for having something to reach for. I know these files better than anyone alive. Let me finish what I started instead of hiding from it. She was quiet a long moment, her back still to me, and when she finally turned, there were things in her face I don't think she'd let anyone see since the fire. I'm not going to lose you to him, she said. I'd burn the whole company down first. You won't have to. I crossed the distance this time, the one she always made other people cross, and put my hand flat against her chest, over the place I imagined her heart working too hard. You're going to help me prove exactly what he did. All of it. The fraud and the fire both. And then we're going to make sure he never gets to threaten either of us again. Something in her posture unwound, just slightly, just enough. Tell me what you need. Every file Pierce Continental has ever routed through the Holloway line, and 48 hours. She almost smiled, the ghost of it, gone as fast as it came. You'll have both by tonight. I did not sleep in the 48 hours that followed. I don't think Cassia did either. We worked at the warehouse table with the storm windows dark behind us, and I did the thing I had spent my whole life doing invisibly, unpraised. In a basement no one thought to look in, I found the lie inside the numbers. 600 kilograms became 6 shell accounts, became a wire authorization signed in a hand I recognized instantly from 3 years of insurance claims by Desmond Pierce himself, dated the week before the warehouse fire that had killed Elena Voss. He didn't just steal from the company, I said, very quietly, at 4 a.m, the pieces finally whole in front of me. He needed the harbor lease Elena controlled. He set the fire to clear the obstacle, and then he spent 5 years laundering the cover-up through the very subsidiary he wanted to steal. Cassia read the final page in silence. When she looked up, her eyes were wet, the first and only time I ever saw that happen, and her voice, when it came, was steadier than I had any right to expect. Then we take it to the board tomorrow, she said, in front of everyone. Odette drove us to Pierce Continental's headquarters 2 hours before the emergency board session Cassia had called, not to confront him privately, but to be certain, Cassia's word, cold and exact, that he wouldn't run before the truth found him in front of witnesses. We were 3 floors up when his security tried to stop us, and it was Cassia, not me, who put herself between his men and my body without a second's hesitation, taking a shove meant to knock me back that instead sent her into the wall hard enough to split her lip. "Are you all right?" I said, hands on her face, checking her the way she'd checked my palm the first night we met. "I'm fine." She caught my wrists, gentle even now, even furious. "Now we're even." Even. You gave me back the truth about Elena. I intend to keep giving things back until the debt's settled. She turned toward the men who'd shoved her, and something in her expression made all 3 step back without being told twice. Get out of my way, or explain to a room full of journalists in 2 hours why Pierce Continental's security assaulted a Voss Maritime executive on your own property. We found Pierce in his office, calm, composed, already reaching for a story he thought would hold. He didn't get to finish it. Cassia set the files on his desk one at a time, unhurried, each one a nail. You killed her, she said, quiet in a way that was worse than shouting. For a harbor lease. And then you spent 5 years pretending my grief was an accident you had nothing to do with. His composure finally cracked. Cassia, be reasonable. I have been reasonable for 5 years. Something moved behind her eyes, old and enormous, and for one terrible second I understood exactly how she'd earned the name the traitors whispered. Her hand closed around a heavy glass paperweight on his desk, and I watched her weigh, visibly, everything she could do to him in that room with no one watching. Cassia, I put my hand over hers, over the glass, steady, not like this. Let them watch him fall in the light. That's worse for a man like him than anything you could do in the dark. She looked at me a long moment, breathing hard, and then, slowly, set the paperweight down. You're right, she said. The board's waiting. The emergency session was standing room only by the time Cassia laid out 5 years of falsified manifests, laundered accounts, and a signed wire authorization dated the week of the fire that had killed her mate. I stood beside her, not behind her, while she named every piece of evidence I had found in a basement nobody thought to look in. And when a board member asked, sharply, who had actually uncovered all this, Cassia didn't hesitate. Marlo Ashford, she said, loud enough for the recording devices, loud enough for the journalists Pierce had tried to use against us. A claims analyst this company nearly let walk out the door unnoticed. She found what a dozen paid auditors missed, twice, and she did it while a man in this room was trying to destroy her for it. I watched Desmond Pierce's face empty out in real time, watched security escort him from a building he'd spent years trying to steal, watched the board vote unanimously to refer everything to federal prosecutors before the meeting even adjourned. Somewhere in the gallery, I caught sight of Julian, pale and silent, already being asked questions by 2 men in dark suits about exactly how much he'd known when he sold my stolen files to a murderer. My mother called that night. I almost didn't answer. Everyone's talking about you, she said, and her voice had a strange note in it I didn't recognize at first, because I had never once heard it aimed at me. Pride. The papers are saying you brought down Desmond Pierce. I did my job, I said. Someone finally noticed. There was a long pause. I'm sorry about the mug, she said, quietly, and it wasn't enough, not nearly enough for 29 years, but it was the first true thing she'd said to me in longer than I could remember. And I let myself take it for what it was worth and no more. Colette's wedding happened 4 days later than planned, delayed by an investigation that made front pages for a week straight, and this time I walked in with my hand in Cassia's, and nothing about it was pretend. Julian didn't attend. Nobody asked me why the man who'd humiliated me for years was suddenly absent from every guest list in the city. Everyone already knew. Cassia stood beside me through the ceremony, through the toasts, through my mother's speech that mentioned my name twice with something that might have been genuine warmth, and when the music started, she pulled me onto the floor and held me the way she'd held me the night everything had finally cracked open between us, careful, deliberate. Like something she still couldn't quite believe she was allowed to have. I have a question, she said against my hair. Ask it. Marry me. Not a question after all then, though her hands, when they found mine, still asked permission in the only way she knew how, waiting, giving me the whole width of the moment to say no. Bond with me. Properly, not a performance for anyone watching. Yes, I said, before she'd even finished, and felt her breath catch against my temple in a way I would carry with me for the rest of my life. The bonding took place 6 weeks later, in the warehouse that had become the first place I'd ever felt entirely seen, with Odette standing witness, in a suit she'd clearly been forced into and complaining about the whole way through, and my mother crying in the front row for reasons that had nothing to do with performance this time. The vows were short. Cassia had never been a woman of excess words, and I had spent my whole life being underestimated by people who mistook quiet for empty, so we kept it simple and true. "I will always find the light on for you," she said, the promise she'd made me weeks before in a much darker room, tested now and unbroken. When she finally asked, low, at my throat, with her lips a breath from the scent gland she'd been careful never to touch without permission, "Tell me to stop, and I will," I told her the only answer I had left. "Don't stop." The bite was gentle and certain, and the bond that opened between us afterward felt less like something new than something finally acknowledged. A door that had been standing open the whole time, waiting for both of us to walk through it. A year on, the Holloway subsidiary Desmond Pierce had once used to hide his crimes, ran clean under new leadership. Mine, a title Cassia had insisted on the week after the trial ended over my protests that a claims analyst didn't become an executive overnight. Odette still called me by my full name in a tone that had gone, somewhere along the way, from suspicious to something close to affectionate. My mother sent a card every month now, small things, nothing that could undo 29 years, but enough that I no longer flinched picking up the phone. On a quiet morning in early spring, I found Cassia at the kitchen table where all of it had started, sunlight coming in low and gold across the water, a small leather-bound ledger open in front of her, the same battered book that had once belonged to my father, that she'd had rebound in the same worn brown leather the week after our bonding, my name embossed beneath his on the inside cover in gold that hadn't tarnished yet. She'd started keeping her own entries in the back half. Not numbers, just small, true things, dates and moments, the kind of ledger nobody had ever taught her it was safe to keep. She looked up when I came in, and something in her face, still so exact, so precise, softened the way only I ever got to see. "Sit down, Marlo Voss," she said, and pushed the ginger tea across the table without being asked. I had spent 29 years being the woman nobody thought to look for twice. It took one impossible, reckless question in an elevator to become the woman someone finally decided was worth finding. Being seen, I learned, was never about being loud enough to be noticed. It was about being known by exactly the right person, all the way through, and choosing, every single morning after, to stay. The end. If Marlo and Cassia's story found something in you, that quiet ache of being overlooked and the fierce relief of finally being chosen, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. I'd love to know in the comments which moment landed hardest for you. The elevator confession, the kiss in the rain-dark kitchen, or the morning Cassia finally let her ledger stay open. Thank you for spending these hours inside their story. Come back soon, because another impossible love, another woman worth fighting for, is already waiting to be told.